Okay, under bonnet on all of the Golfs, there's really one really important place to watch for, and that's along this edge where the wing is actually bolted onto the chassis of the car. It's again a difficult place to repair. There are repair panels available for it. It never quite looks the same or handles quite the same once you've had to do the job. Any rust on the wings are really no problem. The wings unbolt, they're fairly straightforward to get off, and the wings are very, very cheap. So a wing problem either around the headlight or around the back where the aerial is or wherever else you've got any mud trapped really isn't a major problem. As far as the mechanical side of it goes, there are very few major problems on Golfs, whatever mileage they've done, so that's not really a problem. This particular example is an early 1600 GTi, quite easily spotted because the top hose comes off between number 1 and 2 cylinders. 1800s come off between 3 and 4 cylinders and come round like that. By the way, the two engines will interchange with minimum amount of work, so there's no problem if you start with a 16 and really want an 18, you can interchange it very simply. This car has also got an absolutely classic Golf problem of the clutch cable pulling through the bulkhead, which has been repaired on this particular example. If you want to look down in there, you'll see there's a steel repair panel. They're actually stick-on repair panels. Again, only about £10, and that will generally cure it unless it's desperately awful. Left-hand drive cars don't suffer that problem. It's only English cars where the panel's very thin just there. Mechanically, you get very little problem with the engine other than fairly high oil consumption when the cars are done in excess of 100,000 miles. The bottom ends of the engines, we've got lots of customers where the cars reach 200,000 miles with no real major problems. A lot of it's down to how it's looked after. It really doesn't matter if you drive them hard. It needs good oil, good filter, preferably synthetic oil, and you'll need to lift the head at about 100,000 miles to do the valve guides and valve guide oil seals. And on 1600s it's well worth changing the springs at the same time because the valves are heavy and they tend to break springs, and if you drop a valve it's fairly bad news. The gearboxes again give very little major problems other than a rather strange problem which is difficult to quantify because it seems to happen on a very small number of cars, but it's very expensive when it does happen, which is that the diff pin is located by two little hats and they'll slide out, and a diff pin then passes through the casing in with untold amount of damage, wrecking the clutch, covering it with oil at the same time. But other than that, there's not really a lot of major mechanical things to watch out for. Another problem on all of the Mk1 GTIs is to make sure that the top suspension bush is sound. This one isn't too bad. The rule of thumb is, rule of finger, is if you can put your finger between the top plate and the metal bit, then these want replacing. Always use genuine parts for that.
It makes sense to have a look underneath too, as even newer cars can have hidden problems.
Well, once we get the vehicle up in the air, we usually find a whole lot of other problems. Classic case here, huge dent in the sump, which is obviously fairly easily repaired. Other failure points we get on Golfs, places that give trouble, are the steering rack gaiters either side, the dry shaft gaiters either side, both of which are very, very cheap to repair and fairly straightforward. And the gear linkage, which is quite famous for being really bad. This one's pretty dreadful. The nylon bushes need replacing, and there's a nut on the base here which also needs tightening. This is rather a good example of how a Mk1 should look. There's the rear mounting for the rear beam, which is quite a substantial item. This can get incredibly rusty. This one's been well waxed, so it's good and sound. Same as these fuel lines that run out and across the bottom of the car. They're an MOT failure now. If they're bad, these have been well waxed and are in good condition.